Hey, everybody. I hope that you are doing well today. Happy Friday, if it's Friday that you're watching this. And welcome to episode number 2 of the Unordinary Perspective podcast. Today, we're going to talk about the intersection of Alec Baldwin and killing babies. It's going to get a little uncomfortable in some parts of this, but there actually is a real intersection. The intersection, the common denominator, is manslaughter. I can't help but chuckle every time I hear that word because I picture Brian Regan in this comedy bit about how horrible some of these laws sound. And anyways, if you haven't seen Brian Regan on manslaughter, just look it up, get a chuckle. But anyways, this is a very, very important topic that I think more people need to be spending time paying attention to. The big topic here is firearm safety. It's gun safety. And the consequences of not being safe with guns is that people unintentionally die. That's what happened with Alec Baldwin on the set of Rust as they were filming in early 2021. Now, a lot of people have heard that news, but if you aren't familiar with what happened here, let's just unpack it real fast. Alec Baldwin, an actor, was on set in California in early 2021. He picked up a firearm, pointed it at a coworker, and killed her. There were lots of arguments and public speculations about what exactly happened, how that could possibly happen. Like, why would you have live ammunition on a filming set? Reasonable question. Well, that was answered earlier in the day. Before that had occurred, the cast and the crew, they were engaging in a live fire exercise. They were target practicing. They were getting familiar with the guns and, figuring out proper ways to handle them and safe ways to handle them. And my guess is that someone wasn't paying close enough attention. And of course, the other logical argument that comes up in this whole scenario is the fact that there is an armorer on that set. There was somebody responsible. There was somebody there whose job it was to handle the weapons, handle the ammunition, and ensure that safety protocols were being followed. Obviously, something didn't happen there as it should have panned out either. And of course, people have been asking, especially over the last 7 to 10 days, as it was announced formal charges were filed against Alec. Like, well, why would Alec be handling that? It was somebody's job to be handling safety. They should have been charged. Should have been their fault. Okay, the armorer was charged with the same thing that Alec Baldwin was. So let's unpack why it is appropriate that both of them face these charges, and that they both have their day in court, and that justice is ultimately served for, is it Helena? I think it's Helena Hutchins is how you pronounce her name. She was a cinematographer, and she lost her life as a result of people being negligent with guns and not being safe with them. So let's unpack that. First of all, what is manslaughter? Let's take a look at California's manslaughter law. In Penal Code 192, manslaughter is defined as the unlawful killing of a human being without malice. It is of 3 kinds: voluntary, upon a sudden quarrel or heat of passion; involuntary, in the commission of an unlawful act not amounting to a felony; or in the commission of a lawful act which might produce death in an unlawful manner, or without due caution and circumspection. This subdivision shall not apply to acts committed in the driving of a vehicle, which is the 3rd, vehicular. Alec Baldwin and the armorer, let's look up her name as well, should name everybody. Hannah Gutierrez Reed was the armorer. They were both charged with involuntary manslaughter. So let's unpack what that was. The unlawful killing of a human being without malice in the commission of an unlawful act not amounting to a felony, or in the commission of a lawful act which might produce death in an unlawful manner, or without due caution and circumspection. This ultimately means that neither one of them intended for someone to lose their life that day. It was unintentional. It was without malice. but a human being was killed. Killed meaning there was action that led to that incident. There was action that caused a human being to die. And that event, that circumstance, occurred without malice, meaning that neither one of them intended for that to happen, but it happened. Both people that day had responsibility. Alec and the armorer had responsibility. The armorer, I think, is easier for a lot of people to understand, especially left-leaning individuals, people who may not be familiar with firearm safety, be familiar with, be familiar with how to responsibly handle guns. So maybe I should have backed off and not made that a partisan issue, but I can't help but recognize that more empathetic and sympathetic people don't necessarily want to see Alec Baldwin, the poor guy who just, he got a gun that should have been handled in a safer way. The armorer had responsibility because it was her job to make sure that live ammunition and blank ammunition in that setting were separated, to make sure that the live fire events occurred and that things were handled in a safe way, that all weapons were cleared and dealt with in a safe way to then later be used in filming with blank ammunition. And in all of that case, she should have had possession of the firearms at all times when not otherwise in use. So I don't know what exactly happened in the timing and the events and all of that kind of stuff between the live fire target practice that they were all engaging in this incident. But at some point in time, Alec picked up a firearm loaded with live ammunition, pointed it at somebody, and pulled the trigger. So the armorer should have been in possession of all the firearms after that event. Like, this should not have happened. I agree. She has some liability in there, and she will face charges for this, and she will have an opportunity to answer in court her portion of responsibility. But Alec, I think this firmly falls on Alec. I think that if there's anybody here with a chance of getting out of a charge and not being found guilty of this, I think it's the armorer. Because at the end of the day, as a responsible gun owner, as someone who knows how to safely handle guns, you do not pick up a firearm without knowing the condition of that weapon, period. You do not handle a gun without knowing its condition. That is so basic. You do not handle a gun unless you know the condition of that weapon, meaning that you know, is it loaded? Is it unloaded? What is the condition of the weapon? Is there a magazine in? Does the magazine have ammunition in it? Is there a round in the chamber? Is the safety mechanism of that pistol engaged, if there's a safety? And all of that was presuming that there was a magazine involved. And in which case, in Alec's, in this issue at that set, they were dealing with a revolver. So it's a little bit different. And I could see how this may be a little more difficult for Alec to know the condition of the weapon. Because in a revolver, you basically just have this round rotating thing. You've all seen it kind of like in the Western movies and Western shows. A revolver has got this round spindle between the hammer and between the barrel. That ammunition gets set inside of that rotating barrel. And as you pull the trigger, when you pull the trigger, a hammer goes forward, strikes a firing pin, hits the ammunition, it explodes, sends the bullet down the barrel. And then during that, after the hammer strikes the firing pin, it rotates that entire chamber so that the one that you just fired is no longer there, and it moves it out of the way, and a new bullet that was there gets set in place, ready to fire again. And because of that, the entire cartridge, the casing, the silver piece here, the casing is covered, and all you can see from the edge is the back end. That's all you see. So you can't tell, is there a bullet in there or is it a blank? So it may have been more difficult for him to know the condition of the weapon at that time, but nonetheless, the next big piece and the first basic element of gun safety, you do not point a firearm at something that you do not intend to destroy or kill. You do not aim a gun at something that you don't intend to kill. You don't do it. And secondly, you do not pull the trigger. You do not put your finger on the trigger until you are ready to send the bullet at whatever it is that you're aiming at. You don't do it. So regardless if he even knew the condition, regardless if he knew that there was something in there and he assumed it was a blank because the armor should have never had live ammunition outside of that live fire exercise, okay, whatever, you should not have pointed the gun at that person and you should not have pulled the trigger. Like, that is insane. And honestly, regardless of the assumption if it was a blank or a live round, regardless, there was a live round. And it was Alec that picked up the gun, pointed it at his coworker, pulled the trigger, and caused the hammer to let loose, strike the firing pin. Let's talk about the anatomy of a bullet. Strike the primer, which is that little center dot. It striked the primer. It caused an explosion inside of the cartridge. And it sent that bullet down the barrel into his coworker, and it killed her. It was his action, raising the gun, pulling the trigger, and causing that bullet to fire. That was on Alec. He unintentionally caused her death. That is why this charge is appropriate. And he needs to answer for that. Because somewhere along the lines, he was negligent with that gun. He should have known it was loaded. He should have known not to do that. He should have known not to point a gun at somebody and not to pull the trigger. So let's look at Washington State's manslaughter law. We'll move on from that scenario and let's just look at the differences between California and Washington here. So first of all, let's back up real fast. Manslaughter in California under Penal Code 192 is not a felony. Interesting fact. Now let's move on to Washington's law. In the Revised Code of Washington, Chapter 9A, 32.060, manslaughter in the first degree. A person is guilty of manslaughter in the first degree when he or she recklessly causes the death of another person, or B, he or she intentionally and unlawfully kills an unborn quick child by inflicting injury upon the mother of such child. We're going to pause on the gun safety topic real quick and dive right into the moral corruption, the intellectual dishonesty, and the logical inconsistency of the fact that Washington state law recognizes an unborn quick child as a person deserving of protection under the law and deserving of justice when somebody assaults a mother and it causes the unborn child to be killed. But we permit and I'll say borderline encourage mothers to terminate the life of their unborn children without legal consequence. I'm going to leave that conversation for another day, but that is a disgusting inconsistency, and it should be addressed. But anyways, manslaughter in the first degree is a Class A felony. So again, that's all under 9A.32.060. 9A.32.070 is manslaughter in the second degree. And this is likely what would have been brought forward to Alec and this armorer had this same incident occurred in Washington state. A person is guilty of manslaughter in the second degree when, with criminal negligence, he or she causes the death of another person. Manslaughter in the second degree is a Class B felony. I mean, ultimately, this is just a sad, unfortunate issue. This never should have happened. And regardless of who you want to pin fault on, reality is that under the definition provided in both states, provided under these definitions, both people contributed to somebody dying without malice as a result of their actions or inaction. And this reinforces my belief that societally, we need to be prioritizing conversations about firearm safety. We have to be teaching people about safe handling of weapons. We have to be teaching people the differences between a bullet and a round or a cartridge, and so that people truly understand, like, what is it that I'm talking about? What is it that we're handling? How do I handle these things in a safe manner to mitigate accidents, to mitigate harm? It used to be that firearm safety and gun safety was taught in public school. And it totally makes sense why it would be taught. I can't logically process why we don't do that anymore. In our country, our government recognizes the inherent right to keep and bear arms. We have the right to. Therefore, wouldn't it be incumbent upon the government to provide safe instruction? Wouldn't it be incumbent upon the government to teach people about their rights and about how to safely and responsibly exercise their rights? And I'm not just talking about with firearms in the Second Amendment. I'm talking about Amendment 1, how you go about protesting. What are the limitations around protest? What is free speech? What are the limitations on that? What is that tied with? What is your right to privacy? What is your right to be secure in your person and your property? What does it mean that you have the right to be secure in all of these things? How do you exercise your rights? That should be incumbent upon our government to do. So if the narrative truly is that we want to mitigate firearm accidents and firearm deaths, if we truly want to mitigate that, and we're pressing into matters of law in our legislative session to deal with gun control or deal with whatever else, why aren't we focusing on instructing safe handling? It doesn't make any sense why we would avoid that. Unless, of course, we're being lied to and the narrative about this truly being about safety is just a sham. I mean, that couldn't possibly have anything to do with it, could it? I really don't want to impugn people's intentions here. I'm just saying that the inconsistency draws a pretty clear line to conclusions, and they're not logical leaps. So all of that to say, I really, really think it's important that we process more about gun safety. People need to know safe handling practices. They need to know how to handle a firearm. And had Alec Baldwin known more about gun safety, he would have known better. And honestly, I think he does. I think he does know better. I think he did know better. Because I don't think that there is any human being on this earth above the age of 10. There is no human being on this earth above the age of 10 that picks up a gun and thinks that there's no risk involved. Like, people know that guns possess the power to cause harm. People know it. And for people to not treat guns with the proper respect for the power they possess, that is negligence. I mean, that is negligence. So anyways, I'm going to get off of my soapbox. That's all I had to say about all of this. I hope that you have a fantastic rest of your day or afternoon or whatever it is you're doing, and I will talk to you all soon.